My heart stopped. My blood turned to ice. My hands began trembling as I stared at the small bottle hidden in Theodore's glove compartment. Personal lubricant. Expensive. Recently purchased. Hidden in my husband's car like some dirty secret. The realization hit me with devastating clarity as I watched our daughter-in-law Vivian's car pull into the driveway. The lingering glances between them. Her sudden interest in my business. His insistence that I should step back and let younger minds take control. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning to steal everything I'd built. I carefully placed the bottle back exactly where I'd found it, but my mind was already calculating. Within hours, I'd replaced that lubricant with industrial superglue, set up hidden recording devices throughout the house, and coordinated with my neighbors for maximum exposure. Theodore and Vivian thought they were so clever, so manipulative, so certain they could destroy my life and steal my business. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Hey friend, if you enjoy real gripping stories where justice hits hard and betrayal never goes unpunished, please subscribe. It's 1 second for you but a big deal for me. 6 months earlier, I thought I had the perfect family after 30 years of marriage. I stood in my flagship bakery at dawn, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across the display cases filled with my handcrafted pastries. At 53, Celeste Harrington had built something extraordinary from nothing. Harrington's Artisan Bakery now had 15 locations across 4 counties, and my sourdough bread was featured in restaurants throughout the region. 30 years ago, I'd started with a borrowed mixer and a dream. Now I employed over 300 people and had created a legacy worth millions, something I was proud to pass on to my family. Morning Celeste, called Beatrice, my longtime assistant manager. The weekend catering orders are loaded and ready for delivery. I smiled, adjusting my flour-dusted apron. This wasn't just a business, it was my life's work, built through sacrifice and determination, while my husband Theodore managed the financial side and our son Jasper grew up running between the kitchen counters. Theodore entered with his usual morning punctuality, silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. At 58, he still cut an impressive figure in his tailored suits, though lately he'd been paying extraordinary attention to his appearance. "The quarterly reports look exceptional, darling," he said, kissing my cheek with what felt like rehearsed affection. "Your hard work is really paying dividends." Your hard work. Something about the phrase felt wrong, though I couldn't identify why. Theodore had always been supportive, handling the complex financial operations while I focused on recipes and expansion. But lately, his compliments felt hollow, like he was reading from a prepared script. "I was thinking," Theodore continued, straightening his expensive tie, "perhaps it's time we discussed bringing more family into the business operations. Vivian has such a brilliant eye for market trends, and she's been asking about getting more substantially involved." Vivian. Our daughter-in-law of 3 years, married to Jasper who worked as a firefighter 2 towns over. I'd tried, really tried, to welcome the 30-year-old into our family, but something about Vivian's smile never reached her calculating emerald eyes. During family dinners, Vivian would compliment my cooking while barely touching it, praise the business while suggesting improvements that would fundamentally alter everything I'd built. She spoke with the confidence of ownership, making me feel like a guest in my own establishment. "I think we're managing perfectly as we are," I replied carefully. "The business has found its natural rhythm." Theodore's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Celeste, you can't personally oversee everything forever. We need to think about succession planning, bringing in fresh perspectives and innovative thinking." Fresh perspectives from someone who's never worked a single day in food service? Vivian has a business degree from Stanford. A degree isn't hands-on experience, Theo. I turned back to my mixing bowls, the conversation feeling frustratingly familiar. I built this place by learning every aspect personally. I'm not ready to hand over control to someone who thinks Instagram followers equal business expertise. Theodore fell silent, and when I glanced over, his expression had shifted to something cold and evaluating. It was an expression I'd been seeing more frequently lately, as if he were appraising me, measuring my worth against some unseen standard. The moment passed quickly, replaced by his usual charming smile. "Of course, darling. You know best." But his tone carried a sharp edge that made my stomach tighten with unease. That evening, I prepared dinner for our weekly family gathering, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, fresh dinner rolls, and Theodore's favorite chocolate torte. These dinners had been sacred family tradition for years, time when our small family came together around my dining room table. Jasper arrived first, still in his firefighter uniform after a demanding shift. At 31, he had his father's athletic build but my relentless work ethic, and my heart swelled watching him devour my cooking with genuine appreciation and enthusiasm. "Mom, this salmon is absolutely incredible," he said, reaching eagerly for seconds. "I swear, you could bottle whatever magical process you use and make millions." "The secret is in the herb blend," I laughed warmly. "Maybe someday I'll teach you, when you're ready to learn genuine patience in the kitchen." Vivian arrived 25 minutes late, stunning in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She air-kissed my cheek, leaving a trace of expensive perfume that seemed overpowering in my kitchen. "Sorry I'm late," Vivian said, settling gracefully next to Jasper with practiced elegance. "Traffic was absolutely brutal coming from the city." I frowned slightly. "I thought you mentioned you were at the gym today?" "Oh yes, but I had to stop by that exclusive boutique downtown afterward. You know how these things go." Vivian's laugh was pretty but hollow, like wind chimes in artificial breeze. Throughout dinner, I noticed strange undercurrents I couldn't quite identify. Theodore and Vivian seemed to communicate in meaningful glances and half-finished sentences, while Jasper remained completely oblivious, focused on his food and enthusiastically recounting stories from his latest emergency calls. When Vivian complimented the tort, she positioned her hand strategically near Theodore's, their fingers briefly touching as she reached for her water glass. Such a small gesture that I wondered if I'd imagined it entirely. But Theodore's slight smile in response made my stomach clench with growing unease. "Celeste," Theodore said as we cleared dishes, "I was telling Vivian about your ambitious expansion plans for the North County location. She had some fascinating thoughts about modernizing the brand identity." "Actually," Vivian interjected with that dazzling smile, "I think Harrington's has such tremendous potential to become a genuine regional powerhouse. With the right marketing strategy and perhaps some menu updates to appeal to younger, more diverse demographics." I set down the serving platter harder than necessary. "The menu has been carefully developed and refined over 3 decades. Our customers genuinely love the traditional recipes." "Of course," Vivian said quickly, "I just meant perhaps adding some contemporary options alongside the beloved classics. Adaptation and evolution are so crucial in modern business, don't you think?" The word adaptation hung in the air like a direct challenge. I looked around the table, at Theodore nodding approvingly, at Jasper obliviously finishing his dessert, at Vivian watching me with those calculating eyes. "I think," I said slowly and deliberately, "that some things are worth preserving exactly as they are." The rest of the evening passed with forced pleasantries, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd somehow failed a test I didn't know I was taking. As Theodore walked Vivian to her car, I watched from the kitchen window, noticing how they stood closer than necessary, how Theodore's hand lingered inappropriately on Vivian's lower back. "Mom." Jasper appeared beside me, dish towel in hand. "Everything okay? You seem unusually tense tonight." I forced a reassuring smile for my son. "Just tired, sweetheart. Long, demanding week at the bakery." But as I watched Theodore's silhouette in the driveway, still talking intimately with Vivian long after Jasper had left, I felt the first whisper of genuine doubt creep into my heart. 30 years of marriage had taught me to read my husband's moods and behaviors, and lately, Theodore seemed like a complete stranger wearing a familiar face. Over the following weeks, small details began accumulating like gathering storm clouds. Theodore started working late more frequently, claiming meetings with potential investors or complex supplier negotiations. He'd always handled the business finances, but now he seemed secretive about the books, deflecting my questions with vague reassurances about diversifying revenue streams and exploring new opportunities. Vivian became an increasingly frequent presence, dropping by the bakery with suggestions for efficiency improvements and cost-cutting measures. She spoke with the confidence of someone who already owned the place, making recommendations that would fundamentally change everything I'd worked to build. "I've been researching commercial baking suppliers," Vivian announced one Tuesday morning, spreading detailed printouts across my desk. "We could save thousands annually by switching to these bulk ingredient providers." "Those suppliers use preservatives and artificial flavors," I replied, not looking up from my inventory sheets. "Everything we make is completely natural, fresh, made from scratch daily. That's our entire brand identity." "But think of the profit margins. Customers won't even notice the subtle difference." I'll notice the difference. And yes, they absolutely will too. I finally looked up, meeting her eyes directly. This isn't just about profit margins, Vivian. It's about integrity and quality. Vivian's smile faltered for just a moment, revealing something cold and hungry underneath. Of course, Mrs. Harrington. I'm just trying to help the family business grow and prosper. That evening, Theodore came home late again, claiming he'd been reviewing complex supplier contracts. But his shirt smelled distinctly like expensive perfume, not my subtle vanilla and sandalwood scent, but something floral and cloying. When I mentioned it, he laughed it off as fragrance from a client meeting, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine directly. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while Theodore slept peacefully beside me. 30 years of marriage, 30 years of building a life together, 30 years of complete trust. But trust, I was beginning to realize, might have been my greatest vulnerability. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I started paying attention, really paying attention, to the details I'd been dismissing as paranoid imagination. Theodore's phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. Vivian's sudden expertise in bakery operations despite never having worked in food service. The way they looked at each other during family dinners, sharing some secret understanding that excluded everyone else. And most disturbing of all, the growing frequency of Theodore's suggestions that I should consider stepping back and enjoy the fruits of my labor, while younger, more energetic minds took over the demanding day-to-day operations. As I watched the sun rise through my kitchen window, I felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. For 30 years, I'd been a wife first, a mother second, and a businesswoman third. But if my husband and daughter-in-law thought they could manipulate me into surrendering everything I'd worked to build, they were about to discover exactly how much fight was left in the woman who'd started with nothing and created an empire. I just didn't know yet how deep their betrayal really went, or how far they were willing to go to steal my life's work. 3 weeks later, my world began unraveling in the most mundane way possible, through a forgotten phone charger. Theodore had taken my car for its scheduled maintenance, leaving his luxury sedan in the driveway. When I realized I'd forgotten to grab my phone charger before heading to an important early morning suppliers meeting, I decided to check Theodore's glove compartment for our spare emergency charger. I opened the car door, breathing in the familiar scent of Theodore's cologne mixed with expensive leather seats. We'd bought this car together 5 years ago, celebrating the bakery's expansion into its 10th location. I remembered how proud Theodore had been, insisting on premium leather interior because successful people deserve the finest things. The glove compartment was typically organized: insurance papers, owner's manual, tire gauge, emergency roadside kit. But as I moved the papers aside looking for the charger, my fingers brushed against something completely unexpected. My heart stopped. Personal lubricant. Expensive, intimate, definitely not something that belonged in the family car for any innocent reason. My hands began trembling uncontrollably as I picked up the bottle, turning it over in my palms. Barely used, recently purchased based on the pristine packaging and intact label. Theodore and I hadn't been intimate in months. Our relationship had grown distant, perfunctory, reduced to polite conversation about schedules and business obligations. So why was there lubricant hidden in his car? My blood turned to ice as the devastating implications crystallized. Theodore was having an affair. I sat in the driver's seat, still holding the bottle, feeling like the ground had opened beneath me. 30 years of marriage. 3 decades of trust, partnership, building a life together. And he was betraying me with someone else. But who? The question haunted me as I drove to my meeting, going through the motions of negotiating wholesale flour prices while my mind churned with possibilities. Theodore worked mostly from home or at the bakery offices. His social circle consisted mainly of mutual friends, business associates, and family members. Family. The thought hit me like a devastating physical blow, so overwhelming I had to pull over to the side of the road. My stomach lurched as I remembered those lingering glances between Theodore and Vivian, the way they seemed to communicate without words, Vivian's sudden passionate interest in the bakery business, Theodore's insistence that we needed fresh perspectives and younger minds. No. I wouldn't jump to that horrifying conclusion. Not yet. But over the following days, I found myself paying attention to details I'd previously dismissed. Theodore's phone, which he now kept face down and never left unattended. His new habit of showering immediately after coming home, even from short trips to the grocery store. The way he'd started dressing more carefully, paying attention to his appearance with the dedication of someone trying to impress someone special. I began noticing discrepancies in his explanations. Tuesday evening, he claimed to be at a business dinner with potential investors, but when I called the restaurant he'd mentioned, they had no record of any reservations under his name. Thursday afternoon, he said he was meeting with our accountant about tax planning, but I knew our accountant was vacationing in Europe that entire week. The lies were small, easily overlooked individually, but together they painted a picture that made me physically sick. On Friday evening, I made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. I hired a private investigator. Donovan Pierce came highly recommended by my attorney, a discreet professional who specialized in matrimonial investigations. I met him at a coffee shop 3 towns away, feeling like a character in some sordid drama instead of a respected businesswoman who'd spent 3 decades building a life based on trust and honesty. "I need to know if my husband is having an affair," I said without preamble, sliding an envelope across the table containing Theodore's photo, daily schedule, and vehicle information. Donovan was probably 45, with compassionate eyes and the demeanor of someone who delivered devastating news countless times before. "Mrs. Harrington, I have to ask, are you genuinely prepared for whatever I might discover? Sometimes the truth is significantly harder to live with than suspicion." I thought about the lubricant bottle, still hidden in my purse like damning evidence. I need to know the truth. I can't make informed decisions based on uncertainty and paranoia. Fair enough. I'll need approximately 2 weeks for a thorough investigation. Photos, timeline documentation, comprehensive activity records. If there's something to discover, I'll find it. Those 2 weeks stretched like months. I went through the motions of my daily routine, managing the bakery, overseeing staff, developing new recipes, while inside I felt like I was slowly dying. Theodore's behavior became even more suspicious, as if he sensed my growing awareness but couldn't quite pinpoint what had changed. Vivian stopped by the bakery more frequently, always with some suggestion for improvement or modernization. Each visit felt like a test, with Vivian probing for signs that I suspected anything. "I've been thinking," Vivian said one afternoon, perching elegantly on the edge of my desk with studied casualness, "perhaps it's time to bring in outside consulting. Fresh eyes on the operation, you know? Someone who could objectively evaluate whether we're maximizing our potential." I looked up from my computer screen. "Since when is this we, Vivian?" Vivian's laugh was like breaking crystal. "Oh, you know what I mean. Family business and all. I just want what's best for everyone involved." "And what exactly do you think would be best?" "Well," Vivian leaned forward conspiratorially, "perhaps it's time you considered stepping back gradually. Enjoying the success you've built instead of grinding away every single day. You've earned the right to relax, let other people handle the stress and pressure." The suggestion was delivered with such sweet concern that it took me a moment to recognize the trap. Step back. Let other people handle the stress. Other people like Vivian and Theodore, presumably. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm not ready for retirement. This bakery is my life's work." Of course. I just meant perhaps delegating more responsibility. Theodore has such brilliant ideas for expansion, and he really understands the financial complexities better than anyone. Theodore has brilliant ideas. As if the past 30 years of growth had been his vision instead of mine. As if I'd been the junior partner in building my own business empire. On Wednesday evening of the second week, Donovan called. "Mrs. Harrington, I have the information you requested. Can we meet tomorrow morning?" My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. "Did you discover something?" "Ma'am, I think it's better if we discuss this in person. Are you available at 10 a.m.? That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay beside Theodore, listening to his peaceful breathing, wondering how someone could betray their spouse so completely while sleeping like an innocent child. When he rolled over and unconsciously reached for me in his sleep, I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming. The next morning, I sat across from Donovan in the same coffee shop, watching him arrange photographs and documents with the careful precision of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrington. Your suspicions were completely correct." The photographs were devastating in their crystal clarity. Theodore and Vivian entering a hotel together, holding hands like lovers. Vivian leaving Theodore's car in a secluded parking garage, her hair disheveled and her clothing wrinkled. Theodore kissing Vivian passionately against her apartment door with the desperate intensity of a man half his age. But the audio recordings were infinitely worse. "She's so incredibly naive," Vivian's voice crackled through the small speaker with contempt. 30 years of building this business and she still thinks it's about the recipes and the artisan quality. She has absolutely no idea how much it's actually worth or how to maximize its potential. "The quarterly assessments show we're sitting on an absolute goldmine," Theodore replied with cold calculation. 15 locations, prime commercial real estate, established customer base, brand recognition. With proper management, we could franchise this concept nationwide and generate millions. And she'd never have to know until it's far too late. Once we have control during her inevitable health crisis, we can restructure everything according to our vision. My blood turned to ice water. Health crisis. Donovan's expression was grimly serious. "There's significantly more, Mrs. Harrington. They've been researching ways to incapacitate you temporarily, nothing immediately fatal, but serious enough to justify transferring business control for medical reasons and family protection." The room spun violently around me. They weren't just planning to steal my business, they were planning to make me sick to accomplish it. "How long has this betrayal been going on?" I whispered. "Based on the recorded conversations, they've been planning this systematic theft for at least 8 months. The physical affair has been active for over a year." Over a year. While I'd been working 18-hour days to expand the business and support our family, Theodore had been planning my destruction with our son's wife. While I'd been hosting family dinners and trying desperately to welcome Vivian into our home, they'd been plotting to incapacitate me and steal everything I'd built. "There's something else," Donovan said, sliding another thick folder across the table. "Financial records. Your husband has been systematically moving money out of the business accounts into hidden offshore holdings." I opened the folder with numb fingers. Bank statements, transfer records, account summaries, all documenting the methodical theft of my life's work. Theodore had been siphoning funds from the bakery's operating accounts, the expansion fund I'd been building for years, even the emergency reserve I'd insisted on maintaining for employee security. "How much has he stolen?" I asked. "Nearly $600,000 over the past year." The number hit me like a devastating physical blow. $600,000, enough to fund 3 new bakery locations, enough to upgrade equipment across all existing stores, enough to secure my employees' livelihoods for years to come. Where is all that money going? Shell companies registered in Vivian's maiden name. Cayman Islands accounts. Real estate purchases in cities where you have no business presence. Donovan pointed to specific transactions with professional precision. "They're building a completely parallel financial structure, entirely separate from your legitimate business operations." I studied the documents, my business mind automatically calculating the devastating implications. They're creating their own version of my bakery chain, using my stolen money to fund their direct competition. Exactly correct. And based on the recorded conversations, they plan to force you out through medical incapacitation, then claim the original business failed due to your declining health, while their new operation thrives under their brilliant management. The calculated cruelty took my breath away completely. They weren't just stealing my money, they were planning to destroy my reputation, make me look like a failing businesswoman who'd lost control of her own creation. Meanwhile, Theodore and Vivian would emerge as the brilliant innovators who'd salvaged what they could from my supposed mistakes. "I need copies of absolutely everything," I said with deadly calm. "And I need you to continue monitoring them closely. Can you install surveillance equipment in places where they typically meet?" Already accomplished. Audio and video recording in the hotel room they use regularly, tracking devices on both vehicles, and I've been monitoring their communication patterns. Donovan hesitated professionally. "Mrs. Harrington, what you've discovered here goes far beyond simple adultery. This constitutes financial fraud, conspiracy, possibly attempted harm. You need to involve law enforcement immediately." "Not yet." My voice was steady, but inside I felt like molten steel. "I need to understand the complete scope of their plan first. And I need to protect my son from this devastating betrayal." Jasper. My heart broke thinking about my boy, working his dangerous firefighter job while his wife and father betrayed him in the most devastating way possible. He'd been married to Vivian for 3 years, trusting her completely while she was planning to destroy his family and steal his inheritance. How do I tell my son that his wife is having an affair with his own father? I asked quietly. Donovan's expression softened with genuine compassion. In my extensive experience, sometimes the truth reveals itself naturally. You might not have to tell him anything. Circumstances have a way of exposing betrayal on their own terms. Over the next few days, I lived a double life that would have impressed any professional actress. During the day, I maintained my normal routine at the bakery, while internally cataloging every detail of Theodore and Vivian's elaborate deception. In the evenings, I played the role of oblivious wife, listening to Theodore's lies with apparent interest and trust. How was your meeting with the insurance adjusters? I asked over dinner Wednesday night. Extremely productive, Theodore replied smoothly, cutting his steak with surgical precision. They're recommending some policy adjustments that could save us significant money long term. I knew he'd spent the afternoon in that hotel room with Vivian, making passionate love to his son's wife while planning his own wife's downfall. The insurance meeting was complete fiction, but he delivered the lie with such conviction I almost believed it myself. That's wonderful, darling. I'm so grateful you handle all those tedious details. Theodore smiled warmly at my praise, and I realized he genuinely enjoyed my ignorance. He liked believing he was significantly smarter than me, that his careful manipulation was going completely undetected. His arrogance would ultimately be his downfall. Thursday evening brought another family dinner, and I watched the performance with new understanding. Vivian arrived 15 minutes late, apologizing breathlessly about traffic while her lips looked slightly swollen and her hair had that particular tousled quality that came from recent intimacy. Theodore's cologne was stronger than usual, probably covering Vivian's distinctive perfume. Jasper, bless his completely oblivious heart, was focused on his food and excitedly telling us about a complicated rescue he'd performed that morning. 3-car accident on Route 9, he said, gesturing enthusiastically with his fork. Family trapped in the middle vehicle, unconscious and bleeding severely. We had to use the jaws of life to extract them, but we managed to get everyone out alive. You're so brave, sweetheart, Vivian cooed, placing her hand on his arm with convincing affection. I worry about you every single day. The hypocrisy was absolutely breathtaking. Vivian was expressing concern for Jasper's safety while actively destroying his family behind his back. I watched her performance with fascination and disgust. I've been thinking, Theodore said, perhaps it's time we started involving Jasper more in the business side of operations. Family enterprise and all that. My attention sharpened immediately. This was completely new. I don't know anything about running a bakery, Jasper laughed. I can barely make toast without burning it. Not the baking side, Theodore clarified smoothly. The management side. Strategic planning, expansion decisions, financial oversight. You're intelligent, responsible, excellent with people. Those skills translate to any business. Vivian nodded enthusiastically. It would be absolutely wonderful to have the whole family involved. Like a true family legacy. I felt the trap closing around me with suffocating precision. They weren't just planning to eliminate me, they were planning to use Jasper as a figurehead, a legitimate family member to validate their takeover. My own son would unknowingly become complicit in their theft. I think that's premature, I said carefully. Jasper has his own career, his own calling. The fire department needs good people. But Mom, Jasper said earnestly, maybe Dad has a point. If something happened to you, shouldn't the family know how to keep everything going? If something happened to you. The phrase hung in the air like a direct threat. Had they already started planting seeds in Jasper's mind, preparing him for his mother's mysterious health decline? After dinner, as we cleared dishes, Vivian cornered me in the kitchen with practiced precision. Celeste, can I talk to you about something sensitive? My pulse quickened dangerously, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course. I'm worried about you. You've seemed stressed lately. Distracted. Theodore mentioned you've been having trouble sleeping, forgetting things. Vivian's voice was soft with perfectly manufactured concern. Have you considered seeing a doctor? Sometimes women our age experience hormonal changes that can affect memory and cognitive function. The manipulation was so smooth, so expertly delivered, that I almost admired its craftsmanship. Vivian was already laying groundwork for the medical emergency they were planning, establishing a documented pattern of concern about my mental state. I appreciate your concern, I replied evenly, but I feel perfectly fine. Still, perhaps it's worth getting checked out. Just to be safe. Theodore is so worried about you, and we all love you so much. We all love you so much. The words were delivered with such convincing sincerity that for a moment, I almost forgot I was talking to the woman who was planning to harm me while sleeping with my husband. That night, after Theodore fell asleep, I crept down to my home office and spread Donovan's evidence across my desk. Photographs, financial records, audio transcripts, a complete picture of betrayal that was more extensive and calculated than I'd ever imagined possible. I picked up one of the audio transcripts and read Theodore's words again. She's built something worth millions, but she has absolutely no idea how to maximize its potential. With proper management, we could triple the revenue within 2 years. Proper management. As if 30 years of steady growth, careful expansion, and customer loyalty had been accidents. As if my business acumen had been some happy coincidence rather than hard-earned expertise. Vivian's voice on the recording was even worse. The beauty is that no one will question it. Older woman, family stress, working too hard, everyone will assume its natural decline. And Jasper will be so grateful that we're there to help him through the transition. They were planning to traumatize my son, to put him through the agony of watching his mother's supposed decline, while positioning themselves as his supporters and saviors. The cruelty of it was absolutely breathtaking. But as I sat there surrounded by evidence of their conspiracy, I realized they'd made one critical error. They assumed I was weak, naive, easily manipulated. They thought 30 years of playing the supportive wife had made me soft, vulnerable, dependent on Theodore's guidance. They had no idea what kind of strength it took to build a business from nothing. They didn't understand the steel core that had kept me working 18-hour days, fighting for every customer, every location, every success. Tomorrow, I would begin showing them exactly how wrong they were. I spent the weekend developing my strategy with the same methodical precision I'd used to build my bakery empire. Every detail had to be perfect, every contingency planned, every outcome anticipated. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, protection, and ensuring that Theodore and Vivian could never hurt anyone else the way they'd hurt my family. On Monday morning, I made my first move, a visit to Patterson Hardware under the pretense of buying supplies for bakery maintenance and equipment repairs. I need something strong enough to bond metal fixtures permanently, I told the elderly clerk, maintaining my usual friendly demeanor. We're doing some major equipment upgrades and want to make absolutely sure nothing comes loose under industrial use. Industrial superglue is your best bet, he replied, leading me to a comprehensive display of adhesives. This stuff bonds in seconds and sets harder than steel. Once something's stuck with this, you'll need specialized solvents to separate it safely. Perfect. I purchased 2 tubes of the industrial adhesive along with some legitimate bakery supplies, chatting pleasantly about the weather while planning exactly how I'd replace the lubricant in Theodore's glove compartment. The irony was poetic. They wanted to incapacitate me with mysterious medical symptoms, so I'd incapacitate them with their own tool of betrayal. Next, I visited Donovan to coordinate the final phase of surveillance and evidence gathering. I need to know exactly when they're planning their next intimate rendezvous, I explained. And I need you to position cameras and recording equipment to document everything that happens. Mrs. Harrington, Donovan said carefully, what exactly are you planning? Justice, I replied simply. They want to destroy my family and steal my life's work. I'm going to make sure the whole world sees exactly who they really are. Donovan studied my expression for a long moment. I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've seen betrayed spouses do things they later regret. Are you certain you want to go down this path? They made the choice when they decided to betray my son and steal from me. I'm just making sure there are appropriate consequences. Over the next few days, I carefully orchestrated the perfect trap. First, I announced to Theodore that I'd be attending a 3-day bakery conference in Boston, a legitimate event I'd considered skipping, but which now provided the perfect cover for my plan. 3 days. Theodore tried to hide his excitement behind concern. That seems like a long time to leave the business unattended. Beatrice can handle daily operations, and you'll be here to oversee any financial issues, I replied, watching his face carefully. Besides, this conference features workshops on franchise development. Might be useful for our future expansion plans. I saw the gleam in his eyes at the mention of franchising, more evidence of their plan to steal my concept and expand it nationally under their control. Of course, darling. Take all the time you need. The break will do you good. Wednesday evening, I made the crucial switch. While Theodore showered after his late meeting with potential investors, which I knew was actually his hotel rendezvous with Vivian, I slipped out to his car and carefully replaced the lubricant with the industrial superglue. The tubes were similar enough in size and shape that the substitution would go completely unnoticed until it was far too late. My hands were steady as I made the swap, but my heart was pounding with anticipation and nervous energy. In just a few days, Theodore and Vivian would discover exactly what happened when someone tried to destroy my family. Thursday morning, I announced my departure for Boston, kissing Theodore goodbye with the same practiced affection he'd been giving me for months. "Have a wonderful conference," he said, holding me just a moment too long, probably calculating how much uninterrupted time he'd have for his affair. "Learn lots of new techniques." "Oh, I plan to learn some very effective techniques," I replied with a smile that he completely misunderstood. Instead of driving to Boston, I checked into a hotel 15 minutes away and coordinated with Donovan for the final surveillance setup. He'd positioned cameras in strategic locations around our house and confirmed that Theodore had already called Vivian to arrange their Friday afternoon meeting. "They're planning to use your house this time," Donovan reported. "Vivian told her husband she'd be shopping in the city all day, and Theodore thinks you're safely in Boston. They're getting increasingly careless and overconfident." "Perfect. Careless people make fatal mistakes." But I had one more crucial element to arrange: the smoke signal that would alert neighbors and emergency services at exactly the right moment. I needed witnesses, lots of them, and I needed my son Jasper to be part of the emergency response team. Thursday evening, I made my final preparations. First, I installed small recording devices in strategic locations throughout the house: bedroom, living room, kitchen. Then I prepared my kitchen fire trap, a controlled burn that would create enough smoke to trigger the automatic fire detection system and alert the fire department, but not cause any actual damage to my home. I placed a small metal pan on the stove with cooking oil, connected to a timer that would turn on the burner exactly 30 minutes after Theodore and Vivian's planned arrival time. The oil would heat, smoke, and trigger the smoke detectors, automatically alerting the fire department. I positioned towels nearby that would smolder but not ignite, creating maximum smoke with minimal actual danger. Friday morning, I made one final coordination call to ensure everything was in place. I contacted Mrs. Whitmore and Mrs. Castellanos, my neighbors on either side, with a carefully crafted story. "I'm still in Boston, but I'm a bit worried," I told each of them separately. "Theodore mentioned he was working from home today, but I haven't been able to reach him. Would you mind just keeping an eye on the house? If you see anything unusual, smoke, emergency vehicles, anything concerning, please don't hesitate to call 911. Both neighbors, being the naturally curious and community-minded women they were, promised to watch carefully. I knew they'd be at their windows the moment they heard sirens, and they'd make sure to call all their friends to witness whatever spectacle was about to unfold. I spent Friday afternoon in my hotel room, watching the surveillance feeds on my laptop while my phone remained ready for the inevitable emergency calls. At 1:45 p.m., Vivian arrived at my house, dressed in a tight red dress that she probably thought was seductive. At 2 p.m. exactly, Theodore met her at the door, pulling her inside with obvious urgent passion. They had approximately 30 minutes before their passion would turn into their worst nightmare. At 2:35 p.m., I watched on the surveillance feed as smoke began billowing from my kitchen. The smoke detectors started wailing immediately, and I could see Theodore and Vivian's panic through the bedroom camera as they realized something was wrong. But they couldn't separate. The industrial superglue had done its work perfectly. They were literally stuck together in the most intimate way possible, unable to move apart, unable to escape, unable to hide their shame as smoke filled the house and emergency sirens wailed in the distance. At 2:42 p.m., my phone rang. "Mrs. Harrington? This is Captain Rodriguez from the fire department. We're responding to an automatic fire alarm at your residence, and we've encountered a unique situation. Your husband and a female companion appear to be trapped and requiring immediate medical assistance." "Oh my goodness." I gasped with practiced shock. "Is Theodore all right? What kind of medical emergency?" "Ma'am, they appear to be physically stuck together. We're going to need paramedics and possibly hospital intervention to separate them safely. The fire was minor, just some burned oil on the stove, but the medical situation is complex." "Stuck together? I don't understand. How could they be stuck together? There was a pause, and I could hear shouting in the background, probably Theodore and Vivian realizing the scope of their public humiliation. "Ma'am, it appears they were intimate and used some kind of adhesive substance instead of appropriate personal lubricant. This is going to require emergency medical response and specialized equipment." "Oh no. Should I come home immediately?" "That's entirely up to you, ma'am, but this situation will likely take several hours to resolve safely. We're calling for specialized medical equipment and personnel. I'll be there as soon as possible. Captain Rodriguez, is my son Jasper part of the response team?" Another pause. I could hear more commotion in the background. "Yes, ma'am. Officer Harrington is. He's part of the team responding to this incident." Perfect. Jasper would see exactly what kind of people his wife and father really were, in the most undeniable way possible. I drove home with a mixture of anticipation and satisfaction, arriving just as the ambulance was pulling into my driveway. The entire neighborhood had gathered to watch the spectacle: Mrs. Whitmore from next door, the Morrison family from across the street, even elderly Mr. Castellanos, who never left his garden, was standing on his porch with binoculars. The scene was everything I had hoped for and more. Fire trucks, an ambulance, paramedic vehicles, and what appeared to be half the neighborhood gathered in clusters, whispering excitedly and pointing toward my house. Jasper stood beside the ambulance, his face pale with shock and barely controlled fury. When he saw me approaching, he broke away from his team and strode over with the kind of controlled anger I'd seen him use at dangerous fire scenes. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice tight with emotion, "I need to tell you something about Dad and Vivian." "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Captain Rodriguez said there was some kind of accident. Jasper's jaw clenched visibly. "It wasn't an accident. They were together. In your bedroom. They're stuck together because someone replaced normal personal lubricant with industrial superglue." I let my face register appropriate shock and devastation. "Together? You mean?" "They've been having an affair, Mom. Dad and my wife. The paramedics are trying to separate them, but it's going to require surgery. They're going to have to be transported to the hospital still, attached." The implications hit me like a wave of vindication. Not only had my trap worked perfectly, but Jasper had discovered the truth in the most undeniable way possible. There would be no gaslighting, no manipulation, no way for Theodore and Vivian to explain away what every emergency responder and neighbor had witnessed firsthand. "I can't believe this," I whispered, letting real tears fall for the marriage I'd lost and the son who'd been betrayed. 30 years, Jasper. 30 years of marriage, and he does this with your wife." Jasper put his arm around me, his firefighter training taking over despite his personal anguish. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I'd known." "How could you have known?" "I didn't know." The lie came easily because it served a greater truth. Jasper needed to focus on his own healing, not feel guilty for missing signs he couldn't have seen. Around us, the neighborhood continued to buzz with shocked whispers and barely concealed fascination. Mrs. Whitmore was explaining to anyone who'd listened that she'd always thought something was suspicious about that young woman. Mr. Morrison was shaking his head and muttering about the sanctity of marriage, while his wife took photos with her phone. Captain Rodriguez approached us with professional sympathy and obvious discomfort. "Mrs. Harrington, the situation is medically complicated. The team believes your husband and the young woman will need surgical separation at the hospital. The adhesive appears to be industrial-grade superglue, which bonds skin cells permanently." "How long will they be stuck together?" I asked. "Several hours, possibly longer. The hospital will need to use specialized solvents and potentially perform minor surgery to separate them safely without causing permanent tissue damage." The thought of Theodore and Vivian spending the next several hours attached to each other, unable to escape or hide their shame, filled me with deep satisfaction. They'd wanted to play games with other people's lives, now they'd experience the consequences in the most humiliating way possible. Mrs. Castellanos approached with poorly concealed excitement. "Celeste dear, we're all so shocked. Is there anything we can do to help?" "Thank you for your concern," I replied with dignified composure. "It's been a devastating day, but Jasper and I are managing." "Such a terrible thing," Mrs. Whitmore added, shaking her head with exaggerated sympathy. 30 years of marriage, and then something like this happens. You must be absolutely heartbroken." I'm disappointed and hurt, of course. But I'm also relieved to finally understand why our marriage had been feeling so empty lately. Sometimes the truth, however painful, is better than living a lie. The two women exchanged glances, clearly hoping for more dramatic emotional breakdown they could report to the rest of the neighborhood gossip network. But I'd spent 30 years building a business that required grace under pressure. I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart publicly. The ambulance departure was the stuff of local legend. Theodore and Vivian were loaded onto a specially modified stretcher, still intimately connected and covered with a sheet that did nothing to hide the reality of their situation. Vivian was crying hysterically while Theodore kept shouting about sabotage and setup, but no one was listening to his protests. As the ambulance pulled away with lights flashing, followed by Jasper in his department vehicle, I could see neighbors already pulling out their phones to spread the news. By evening, half the city would know about the cheating husband and daughter-in-law who'd gotten literally stuck together during their affair. At the hospital, Theodore and Vivian became an immediate sensation. Emergency room staff whispered excitedly about the super-glue couple, while trying to maintain professional discretion. Word spread quickly through the hospital's social networks and beyond. I sat in the waiting room with Jasper, watching him struggle with the betrayal of two people he'd loved and trusted completely. His wife and his father had both shattered his world in one afternoon, leaving him to piece together the reality of their deception. "How long do you think this was going on?" he asked quietly. "I don't know, sweetheart. But it doesn't matter now. What matters is how we move forward." I keep thinking about all those family dinners, all those times they were sitting right there at your table, pretending to be family while they were. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "I know. I keep thinking about that too." Dr. Rebecca Martinez emerged from the surgical suite after 4 hours, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes bright with the kind of fascination that came from dealing with an unprecedented medical situation. "Mrs. Harrington? I'm Dr. Martinez. I wanted to update you on your husband's condition. How are they?" I asked with appropriate wifely concern. The separation was successful, but extremely complicated. Industrial superglue creates molecular bonds that are incredibly difficult to break without causing significant tissue damage. We had to use a combination of specialized solvents and minor surgical intervention. "Will there be permanent damage?" Dr. Martinez's mouth twitched slightly. "There will be considerable scarring and sensitivity for several weeks. They'll both need extensive follow-up care and will be quite uncomfortable for some time. The psychological impact is often more significant than the physical injury in cases like this." Jasper stood up abruptly. "Doctor, I need to see my wife. I need to hear her try to explain this betrayal." Room 318. "But Mr. Harrington, she's heavily sedated and may not be entirely coherent. The trauma and medication." "I don't care. I need answers." As Jasper strode toward the elevators with determined purpose, Dr. Martinez turned back to me with barely concealed curiosity. "Mrs. Harrington, I have to ask, do you have any idea how industrial superglue ended up being used in this situation? Your husband and his companion keep insisting they used normal personal lubricant." I let confusion and hurt cross my face convincingly. "I have absolutely no idea, doctor. This whole situation is like a nightmare. I never imagined my husband was having an affair, let alone with our daughter-in-law." "Of course. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. The social worker will be available if you need counseling resources." "Thank you. Right now I just want to see my husband and try to understand how our marriage fell apart so completely." Theodore was in room 316, awake but heavily medicated for pain. When I entered, his eyes widened with what looked like genuine terror, not of physical pain, but of facing the consequences of his choices. "Celeste," he said weakly, "I can explain." "Explain what, Theodore? Explain how you've been systematically stealing from our business accounts? Explain how you've been planning to incapacitate me to steal my life's work? Or explain how you've been having an affair with our son's wife for over a year?" His face went completely white. "How did you? What are you talking about?" "I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the shell companies. I know about your plan to make me sick so you could take control of my bakery." I pulled out my phone and played one of Donovan's audio recordings. Theodore's own voice filled the room. "She's built something worth millions, but she has absolutely no idea how to maximize its potential. With proper management, we could triple the revenue within 2 years. You've been planning this systematic theft for months, I continued with deadly calm. Stealing my money, corrupting my son's marriage, preparing to destroy my health and my reputation. Did you really think I was too stupid to figure it out? Theodore tried to sit up but winced in obvious pain. Celeste, you don't understand. The business has so much untapped potential, but you're too conservative, too stuck in outdated methods. Vivian and I were just trying to steal everything I've worked for while traumatizing our son in the process. I leaned closer to his hospital bed. How does it feel, Theodore? Being completely helpless, unable to control the situation, knowing that everyone, every doctor, every nurse, every neighbor, every person in this city, knows exactly what kind of man you really are. The glue, he whispered with dawning realization. You knew. You planned this. I planned justice. You and Vivian wanted to play games with people's lives, so I gave you a game you'll never forget. How long do you think it'll take for the story to spread? Local businessman and daughter-in-law caught cheating, get stuck together with superglue during affair. I imagine it'll be quite the conversation starter at Chamber of Commerce meetings. Theodore's face crumpled as the full scope of his humiliation became clear. My business reputation, my standing in the community. Your business reputation was built on my success, and your standing in the community was earned through my hard work and integrity. You threw all of that away when you decided to betray your family for money and sex. I stood up and smoothed my skirt, feeling lighter than I had in months. The divorce papers will be served Monday morning. Donovan has documented every aspect of your affair and financial fraud. You'll be fortunate if you avoid criminal charges for theft. Celeste, please. We can work this out. Vivian means nothing to me, it was just physical, just a terrible mistake. I love you, I've always loved you. You love my money and my business success. You've never loved me, if you had, you couldn't have planned to harm me while stealing my life's work. I headed toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Theodore? Jasper has already moved back home. He's filing for divorce from Vivian Monday as well. You've lost your son along with everything else. As I left Theodore's room, I could hear him calling my name with increasing desperation. But 30 years of lies and betrayal couldn't be undone with hospital bed apologies. He'd made his choices, and now he'd live with the consequences for the rest of his life. Jasper was emerging from Vivian's room looking like he'd aged 10 years in one afternoon. His jaw was set with a kind of determination I recognized from my own mirror, the look of someone who decided to stop being a victim and start fighting back. How did it go? I asked gently. She tried to blame it all on Dad. Said he seduced her, manipulated her, promised her things he couldn't deliver. Then she tried to blame you, said you were impossible to work with, that the business needed new leadership and modern thinking. Finally she just cried and begged me to forgive her and take her back. And I told her she was right about one thing. The business did need leadership. Yours. And I told her that if she ever contacted me or our family again, I'd make sure every fire department in the state knew exactly what kind of person she was. We rode the elevator down in companionable silence, both of us processing the end of our old lives and the beginning of something entirely new. In the hospital lobby, we encountered Mrs. Whitmore and Mrs. Castellanos, who'd apparently come to check on the family, but were obviously hoping for more gossip. Celeste dear, Mrs. Whitmore said with poorly concealed excitement, we were so worried when we saw all the emergency vehicles. Is everyone recovering? Thank you for your concern, I replied with dignified composure. It's been an extremely difficult day, but Jasper and I are managing. Such a shame, Mrs. Castellanos added, shaking her head with exaggerated sympathy. 30 years of marriage, and then something like this happens. You must be completely devastated. I'm disappointed, of course. But I'm also relieved to finally understand why our marriage had been feeling so hollow lately. Sometimes the truth, however painful, is better than living a lie. As we walked to our cars, Jasper shook his head with something that might have been admiration. Mom, how are you so calm about all this? Dad betrayed you with my wife, stole from your business, and planned to harm you. How are you not falling apart? I considered the question seriously. Because falling apart won't protect my business or help you heal from this betrayal. And because, in a strange way, I feel like myself again for the first time in years. What do you mean? I spent so long trying to be the perfect accommodating wife, making room for Theodore's suggestions and Vivian's input, questioning my own judgment when things felt wrong. Today I remembered who I really am, the woman who built an empire from nothing. That woman doesn't fall apart when people try to destroy her. She fights back intelligently and wins completely. 6 months later, I stood in my flagship bakery at dawn, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across display cases filled with my handcrafted pastries. But everything had changed, not the business itself, but my relationship to it and to my life. The divorce had been swift and decisive. Donovan's evidence of Theodore's financial fraud and adultery left him with no negotiating power whatsoever. He tried to claim spousal rights to half the business assets, but my attorney had demonstrated that Harrington's Bakery was my separate property, built through my labor and vision, with Theodore serving only as a paid employee. The $600,000 he'd stolen was being recovered through asset seizure, and Theodore faced both civil and criminal charges for financial fraud. His reputation in the business community was completely destroyed. No one wanted to work with the man who tried to steal his wife's empire while cheating with his daughter-in-law. Vivian's divorce from Jasper had been equally swift and brutal. She tried to claim that Jasper's firefighter pension entitled her to long-term support, but her year-long affair with his father nullified any sympathy from the court. She'd left town within a month, her social media profiles deleted and her phone number disconnected. "Morning, Celeste." Beatrice called out, entering with her usual cheerful energy. "The weekend orders are loaded, and I have exciting news about the Boston expansion." The Boston expansion. 6 months ago, I'd been planning to attend a conference there as cover for my trap. Now, Harrington's Bakery was actually opening 4 new locations in the Boston market, funded by the recovered stolen money and a substantial business loan I'd secured based on our improved financial transparency. "The permits came through?" I asked, rolling out dough for the morning's first batch of croissants. "All approved. Construction starts next month, and we already have managers selected for 3 of the locations." Beatrice paused in her inventory counting. "Celeste, I have to say, I know the divorce was awful, but the business has never been stronger. You seem, I don't know, more yourself than you've been in years." She was absolutely right. Without Theodore's constant suggestions about delegation and stepping back, without Vivian's pressure to modernize and adapt, I'd rediscovered the pure joy of running my business exactly the way I wanted. No compromises, no second-guessing, no accommodating people who didn't understand or respect what I'd built. Jasper had moved back into his childhood bedroom temporarily while he sorted out his life, but we'd both discovered that we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. He'd started helping with some of the business administrative work in his off hours, not because Theodore had suggested involving family, but because he was genuinely interested in understanding how I'd built something so successful. The neighborhood had eventually stopped talking about the superglue incident, though it had become permanent local legend. Mrs. Whitmore still asked about my healing process, with the kind of fascination people reserved for natural disasters, but most people had moved on to fresher gossip. More importantly, the business community had rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. Other local business owners, particularly women, had reached out with support and genuine respect for how I'd handled the crisis. Several had shared their own stories of partners or family members who tried to undermine their work. On the 6-month anniversary of that awful discovery in Theodore's car, I hosted a small dinner party for the people who become my chosen family: Jasper, Beatrice, Donovan, and a few close friends who'd supported me through the crisis. We gathered around the same dining room table where Theodore and Vivian had performed their fake family loyalty for so many months. "I want to thank all of you," I said, raising my wine glass, "for helping me remember who I really am. 6 months ago, I thought my life was falling apart. Instead, I discovered that my real life was just beginning." Jasper raised his glass in response. "To Mom, who showed me what it looks like to fight intelligently for what you've built and protect the people you love." "To justice served with precision and absolute effectiveness," Donovan added. "To the best boss and friend anyone could ask for," Beatrice contributed. As we clinked glasses, I felt something I'd been missing for years without realizing it: complete alignment between who I was and how I was living. No more compromising my values to accommodate people who didn't respect them. No more second-guessing my instincts to please people who were secretly working against me. Theodore had called twice in the past 6 months, both times from his attorney's office, trying to negotiate reduced financial penalties in exchange for discretion about family matters. Both times, I declined. The consequences he was facing were exactly proportional to the damage he tried to inflict, and I saw no reason to protect him from the results of his own choices. Vivian had made no contact at all, which was probably for the best. Jasper was healing from the betrayal, but seeing her again would only reopen wounds that were finally beginning to close properly. That night, as I prepared for bed in the master bedroom that was now entirely mine, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, accommodating, trusting, willing to doubt her own perceptions to keep peace in her marriage. She'd been a good woman, but she'd been vulnerable to people who mistook kindness for weakness. The woman I was now understood that kindness and strength weren't opposites, they were complementary forces that, combined properly, made someone nearly unstoppable. I was still kind to people who deserved it, still generous with those who showed genuine appreciation. But I was no longer naive about human nature or willing to sacrifice my own well-being to accommodate people who didn't respect my boundaries. Theodore and Vivian had thought they were destroying a weak, trusting woman who would never fight back effectively. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous, a successful businesswoman who knew exactly how much she was worth and was willing to fight intelligently to protect it. They'd gambled everything on their ability to manipulate and deceive, but they'd catastrophically underestimated the woman they were trying to destroy. In the end, their arrogance had been their downfall, and my patience had been my greatest weapon. As I turned off the lights and settled into bed, I smiled thinking about tomorrow's challenges: new bakery locations to plan, staff to train, recipes to perfect. The work I loved, in the business I'd built, surrounded by people who respected and supported my vision. Theodore and Vivian had tried to steal my life, but instead they'd given me something even more valuable: absolute clarity about who I was and what I was capable of protecting. The perfect trap hadn't just caught them in their betrayal, it had freed me to become exactly who I was always meant to be. What would you have done if you discovered your spouse's affair and theft through such evidence? Have you ever encountered people who tried to manipulate you out of something you'd worked hard to build? Share your thoughts in the comments below about recognizing infidelity signs, protecting assets in marriage, and the importance of standing up for yourself when family members betray your trust. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next tale of consequences, catching up with those who underestimate the people they try to destroy.